Moving on, the Reserve Bank of India, the new Governor Sanjay Malhotra, has signaled that he is willing to allow the rupee to be more flexible and move more freely in tandem with its peers in the emerging markets. Now, this is according to a report by Bloomberg. The report states that the new RBI governor is still, however, intervening in the foreign exchange market to curb excessive moves of the rupee versus the dollar. The rupee has weakened sharply, losing as much as 0.14% to touch a new record low of 86.70 to the dollar yesterday. Since the previous RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das's tenure got over, the rupee has slumped 2% against the dollar. It tumbled by the most in nearly 2 years on Monday to cross the symbolic 86 rupees against the greenback. Now remember, Sanjay Malhotra took charge as the new RBI governor in December and has since held multiple meetings with departments at the central bank ahead of the first monetary policy meeting scheduled later in the month of February. The question we asked today is the timing for a flexible rupee right amid global headwinds? Former Finance Secretary Subhash Chandra Garg now joins us. Mr. Garg, good morning. Thank you for joining us on News9 Live.
Good morning.
There are reports of the RBI governor willing for some flexibility in the rupee to find its own value. If that were to happen, the rupee could slide down to 92, 93 rupees against the dollar. Add to that the double whammy of rising oil prices and India's import bill goes through the roof. Is the timing of even a discussion on allowing flexibility in the rupee right?
So, see, the RBI has been following this policy of allowing orderly movements downward or upward in the rupee value to dollar for quite some time. Last 15, 20 years, that has been the policy. The difference which now seems to be suggested is that you are a little more comfortable on the downward revision of the rupee value to the dollar. And that is what is in witness for last couple of days, the rupee having crossed 86 and about to touch 87 any time. So this is what should be read. Now, how and why the RBI should be thinking of this kind of situation or status, one has to read into what is happening into the reserves, how much of the reserves you already spent, because you can keep the dollar or rupee value in a range, smaller range, only by sort of spending the reserves when required. So this is, since you have spent about 70 to 80 billion dollars already in last three to 4 months, and you've not been able to arrest or keep the dollar rupee exchange rate in that smaller range, I think this is because the fact of the situation suggests that this is, there is no course other than this which is open. And it is also compounded by the fact that the dollar is strengthening against all the currencies massively. And when dollar strengthens, obviously, the rupee has to sort of fall as well. So I think this policy stance, if it is correct, because RBI is still entering into, because there's so much of dollar demand, it is still entering into to keep the downward movement into that order. But I think the situation is such where it will not be able to stop the downward movement very, very high. I have written, I see 100 to a dollar in next three to 4 years.
100 rupees against the dollar in the next 3 to 4 years, which incidentally is going to be good for India's export economy, but not so good for India's imports. And that could add to the inflation pressure, which India already is reeling under. But Mr. Garg, one final question to you. I want to understand from you, is this flexibility of the rupee finding its own real value without forex operations being done in tandem with the government's vision for India to become a manufacturing-centric economy? And hence, if we export more goods and services outside of India, a weaker rupee and a stronger against a stronger dollar is likely to bode well for India's current account. Is that something that could be at play here?
So I think this argument, which is advanced very frequently by people, economists and sometimes from the government end, that the rupee depreciation will prove better for encouraging our exports. I think one need to go into the internals of our export basket. Services exports have not been affected adversely by the relatively stronger rupee, so to say, because that is where our core strength is. Goods export, if you look at the basket is not such where the depreciation of rupee might help majorly. It might actually keep the competitiveness because if other currencies also decline to the dollar, if we don't decline, then we become non-competitive. So it is only to that extent. But to your question about the government's preference, I think if you look at the government's stated goal of making $5 trillion economy by 24-25, that is very adversely affected by
Absolutely.
the dollar getting strengthened and the rupee getting lower. This
Right.
year also, if we end up with 4% depreciation by March,
Yeah.
in fact, the dollar
The Indian economy in
ETC
dollar terms would actually
will be actually growing much
be in the
smaller.
constant lane.
So
Absolutely. Well,
3.57 to not exceeding 3.75
right.
billion. So we'll be far away from 5 trillion.